I said I would have Mike up at 12:20. It's 12:20. I am a man of my word. I value people's time. And so we're now going to spend 20, 25 minutes letting Mike give us Mike Cantrell, by the way, has been involved all his life and with his family in the oil and natural gas business. He's owned drilling companies, invested in drilling companies. He understands the technology, and he understands what public policy and taxation does to the industry and to the businesses. So he's here to address that today. He's going to talk for 20 minutes. We'll hit him with some questions at the end and try and make some sense of what our public policy and taxation is doing to the oil industry. Please welcome Mike Cantrell.
Thanks, John. It's always good to address this group. This group always reminds me of Revelations 3:16. For you're lukewarm, you're neither hot nor cold, I'll spew you out of my mouth. You guys are either hot or cold, you're never lukewarm. We're hot, and I like that. You know, we may have differences of opinion, but we're strong about it. And that's one of the things I've appreciated about this group through the years more than anything else. And it's a pleasure to be here. I want to tell you, first of all, I've made an astute observation, I think, that, I've heard a lot of people say the rhinoceros, at least the black rhinoceros, is becoming extinct, that it's on the endangered species list. I want you to know that that is absolutely false. Rhinos are alive and well and living at the Oklahoma legislature. I tell you, I sat through this thing for the last 2 weeks, and it makes me embarrassed to be a Republican. It really does. If there was a better alternative, I'd take it. I don't know what to say about this out there, except it's pure chaos. There is no honor. There is no one keeping their word. There is no one you can trust. I don't think they even trust themselves from moment to moment. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I really don't, except to tell you it's going to be bad. It's going to be worse than we've got. And it's kind of an interesting thing to me to think about government in general. I'll talk about oil and gas in a minute, but, in general, what is government supposed to do? Really, what did our founders intend for government to do? Protect and defend, carry the mail, take care of roads, do public works projects that are necessary, deemed necessary by our elected officials. And I think educate our children. I think that's a function of government. But that can be done in different ways. We can educate our children in all kinds of ways. I'm on the board of Epic Charter Schools, and it's online education. And we've got almost 10,000 students now that are learning at home, on computer, online. They're being homeschooled, but they're also learning. They have teachers that follow up with them that get paid better than the teacher gets paid in the public school system. And the money, and I don't understand this totally, but the money tracks with the student. So we're able to fund this with money from the state. Now, we get about half what the state schools get, but I think we produce a result that's really pretty darn good. And we've got... I think our averages keep going up. We got C students and B students and some A students. But I think that's continuing to get better. And I think we do have to make sure that we have an educated populace. No question about it. In my mind, that's one of the things in America that we have to, those of us that have been successful, those of us that have got a good life, and we've earned a good life for ourselves and our families, it's incumbent upon us to give the opportunity, not give the life, but give the opportunity for a good life for every citizen. And to me, that starts with educating these children. If we don't educate our children, and I mean educate them from all spectrum. I mean public schools all the way to home schools and everything in between. It just needs to be effective. And I'm kind of radical about it. My wife's a public school teacher. She'd do it for nothing. It's her calling. She knew in the 3rd grade she was going to be a public school teacher. She'd do it no matter what they paid her. She works till 11:30 every night. Now, I'm not saying all teachers do that, but I think those that are called to do it, do that. And so she doesn't want to think about all the things about education. She just wants to educate kids. And that's what we all ought to be about. But I'll tell you, the brick and mortar concept, it may be something that needs to go by the wayside. It is so expensive. And we've got so many of them, over 500 school districts in Oklahoma. All that administration cost. I'm not saying it would be enough to really balance the budget, and it wouldn't be. But we ought to have school consolidation. You know, we ought to do everything. We ought to have income, and we ought to have savings. To me, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about, I'll segue to the oil and gas issue. 15 of us left the oil and gas, OIP, Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association. We were all on the board. 5 of us were former chairmen, including me. We built, you know, I spent the last 40 years of my life helping to build a petroleum association that our mantra was always try to do what's best for the state. We didn't ask for largesse. We didn't ask for anything that we didn't think was good for our state. Now, maybe sometimes we deluded ourselves into thinking it was good to get what we wanted. Maybe we did that, honestly. But, you know, that culture started changing when we got the 2% subsidy, really, for horizontal drilling 3 years ago. And, you know, it was what it was a handful of powerful companies that basically were getting it done, and they just used us to sanction it. We basically said yes to what they had really already worked out. And I'm ashamed that I was part of that process. So we left the OIPA over that cultural difference, and because they quit representing the 3,000 vertical producers around the state and became the Horizontal Drilling Association. And there's nothing wrong with horizontal drilling. It's a wonderful technology, and it's gonna reap a lot more resources than we've reaped before. It's excellent. The rub is when they start taking other people's property in the process. We have a policy in Oklahoma that is unbelievable that you would have in the reddest of red states, the most conservative of states. We use the government to decide private equities in the oil and gas business. If you come to another producer and you say, I want what you've got, and he says, well, I don't want to sell it. He takes you to the Corporation Commission. And he basically gets a toehold somewhere. He'll say you've got 160 acres, and he'll get something on the outside of it. He'll lease 4 or 5 acres or whatever. And then he'll do what's called forced pooling, which is nothing more than subsurface eminent domain for private gain. That's all it is. We are the only state that lets the government set the equities in the oil and gas industry. On minerals, on leases. We're the only state. Imagine that. Oklahoma is, I wouldn't call that even communism. It's not even socialism. It may even be fascism, where you do something for the benefit of a few at the expense of the many. And that's what we've done. We've allowed that, and it's gotten worse with horizontal drilling because it's so expensive. You know, on a vertical pooling, you can join if you want to. You know, the horizontals cost $8 or $10 million, and they don't really care if they make money or not. They're just building reserves. It's almost done totally by publicly traded companies who are selling stock, and they want their stock prices up. So they drill these big wells, and they cost them $8 to $10 million to do. They may never pay out, but they'll come in at 2,000 barrels a day sometimes, and sometimes they'll come in, the average is about 400. But they may never pay out, but boy, it raises their stock prices on Wall Street. And then you have the other type of horizontal driller, and this is, I'm not saying this is the only, I'm in some horizontal wells too, and we do that too when it makes sense. But predominantly the other type is the private equity funded group of producers. And they came to me this year, or last year, and wanted me to run a private equity funded deal, and they had like $250 million they wanted to spend getting in the oil business. Their model is for you to go out and find reserves and book those reserves, and in 5 years sell out for multiples and make your money by getting in and selling, using the money to acquire reserves and selling. Well, what better target is there than reserves people have already found? And they can only do that in Oklahoma. They can go into the producing fields that we have already found as vertical producers and are producing. Yeah, they're stripper wells. So some of them may not be making more than a couple of barrels a day. But they're our property. We've got a contract with the mineral owners to develop that property as long as we're producing in paying commercial quantities. And we also have an obligation to develop. And if the mineral owner doesn't think we're developing the property, they can go to district court and they can sue us for non-development. And 9 times out of 10, the judge will set up a development plan. That's the way it ought to be handled. But no, they don't have to do that in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, they can go to the Corporation Commission. And I got to be careful what I say about them because we got to work there. The way our system is set up, they're much more important to the oil and gas industry than the legislature is. Much more. You talk about power. Those 3 commissioners have absolute power. To think about that. So what happens is, as a practical matter, those 3,000 small businesses out there in Oklahoma that operate the 170,000 stripper wells, those 3,000 businesses all across Oklahoma, they don't go to the Corporation Commission every day. They're out working on their leases. They're paying pumpers. They're making a payroll. Most of us do everything. You know, the company I built, I was the landman, the geologist, the roughneck, the well servicing unit guy. I had my own unit and I brought the well in myself. And that's what most of us are like out there in Oklahoma. I didn't want to go to the Corporation Commission and fight every day. But the big companies and the private equity funded companies have people there every day. They overwhelm you in a rulemaking process. You just cannot stand it to go day after day and talk about arcane arguments about something that ought to be handled simply. We need to abolish government fixing of equities in the oil and gas business. I don't know any other business that does that. I don't know any. You can't, if you've got a 160-acre farm and some big corporation comes in and says, you know, I'm going to build a 640-acre farm and I need your 160 acres to help me do that. So I'm going to go to the agriculture department and I'm going to force you to let me have your land at 10% of what it's worth so I can develop it much better than you can. Now that'd be laughable. Nobody would think that would be doable. It isn't doable, but that's exactly what they do with oil and gas. And so we started the Oklahoma Energy Producers Alliance, and we advocated for basically 2 things. Number one, whatever they do with horizontal drilling, we're not opposed to it, but you have to protect the rights of others. The Oklahoma Corporation Commission does an excellent, they have 3 obligations basically on oil and gas. One is to prevent waste. So under that prevention of waste, they allow development. Almost run away, whatever it takes, drill wells at any expense. They develop it. And they spend 90% of their resources on that phase of it, giving permits, letting people drill, having hearings, and development. There are other 2 functions. One is the protection of correlative rights, which means our rights as vertical producers. They're supposed to protect against abuse of horizontal drilling and against any abuse. And they're supposed to protect the rights of mineral owners. And the third one is the obligation to protect the environment. I can tell you they get an A on the development side. They really spin out these permits to drill horizontal permits almost within days. But they get an F on protecting rights of others in the process. And they get an F in protecting the environment in the process. 23rd and Lincoln, that building, the Jim Thorpe building, they don't have a clue what's going on in the field. They have 4 district field offices that are manned by good people, competent people. They've got, those offices have field inspectors that are assigned to every single field in Oklahoma. They're doing the regulating. They know what's going on. They report it to Oklahoma City, and it gets piled up somewhere. Now, in defense of the commission, in their defense, they've had their resources cut for years, 4 years in a row exactly, and they've got an oil boom on their hands. I get that. What I would ask them to do is, okay, you got to live within your means, so let's split up your responsibilities to make sure you're covering all of them. And not just this runaway development by big companies, because they basically control what goes on there. And, 75%, I'm not saying this is a factor, but 75% of the campaign contributions that elect any given commissioner come from big independent oil producers. Let that sink in. Now, that doesn't influence their behavior, I'm sure. But it's a fact. And it's something we're going to work very hard to correct. And so, I wanted to explain to you our 7% position. Historically, the rate for oil since 1973 has been 7% gross production tax. Now, I can argue till the cows come home about how unfair it is to tax anybody on their gross income. But I'm not going to do that because it's so embedded, there's no way to change that. But I will say that if it's going to be 7% for one, it ought to be 7% for everybody. It's an absolute question of fairness. Now, my dad raised me with the principle of, son, don't worry about what somebody else gets. Just worry about what you get. So you don't envy what somebody else gets. You're not jealous of someone. You're just happy with what you get and you don't concern yourself. So I never thought about that, about it being unfair. To me, what I wanted to do by advocating restoring, they've got a 2% rate for new wells in Oklahoma that they established 3 years ago. There's no sense in that. Oklahoma at 7% is 1.5% below Texas and 2.5% below North Dakota, where all the horizontal wells are being drilled. We're being chumped, guys. We're selling our resources on the cheap. And because of forced pooling, because they can get what they want by using the power of the government to take it, our land values are 1/10 of what they are in Texas. Yeah, think about it. Your minerals, and I can't imagine why the royalty owners would be supporting this legislation to expand long laterals. Expand it to infinitesimal numbers. It just means they're going to drill fewer wells, hold more acreage, pay less lease bonuses, and less lease percentages. In Texas, it's a standard quarter royalty. You know why? Because they have to. If you want to lease my minerals in Texas, you got to make a deal with me, or you've got to drill around me, or you don't drill the well, or you can drill the well and put my part in escrow, and when the well's paid out from my part, I'm back in the well for what I had in the whole unit. Not a 3/16, but I'm the whole working interest that I've got. So that is such an incentive to do deals with people that rarely happens. To where they just drill a well and hold the money in suspense. They make a deal. And that means values are better. Marketplace has determined the values, not the power of the state. And I just find that abhorrent. And so, I just wanted to explain, I'm not for raising taxes. To me, that's restoring a level for everybody. They ought to be the same. And what I found out, I thought, I'm going to get grilled by producers around the state over this deal. Raising that rate, because everybody gets 2% when you drill a new well. I've got some that I'm paying 2%. But they didn't. What the reaction I got around the state unanimously was it's not fair. I never thought of fairness. That isn't what I was taught to think about. But they're right. It isn't fair for guys to pay 7% gross on their 2-barrel wells while these guys are getting the big buildings are getting 2,000 barrel a day wells paying 2% on their gross. And it's a fairness issue as well. So, what we're all about is we're trying to, what we really need to do is not anything to do with long laterals or what they're doing now. Our goal, and it is the most ambitious undertaking of my career, and it's something I would have said 3 months ago you can't do. End forced pooling. End government setting equities in the oil and gas business or anywhere else. The private sector should be setting, the marketplace should be setting the equities in the oil and gas industry and everywhere else. The other thing I wanted to do with the 7%, and this is naive of me, but I thought if a group of oil and gas producers, which would represent 3,000 small producers around the state, if we would come out in favor of eliminating that 2% and everybody paying 7%, we thought all those other 95 tax credits would be done away with. Do you realize what we could do? That's over $1.5 billion, the subsidies that they give to business. Now, nobody's going to agree with me on any of this, probably, totally. But agriculture for years has been they've been subsidized heavily. They pay no sales tax. They pay no sales tax on anything they buy for their farm. Well, guess what? The lawyer in Norman that wants to evade paying income taxes, he gets him a farm, and every tractor he buys, everything he buys, he can write off as a business expense, and then he gets to pay no sales tax on it. I mean, the agriculture, and we've carried them long enough. You know, the marketplace ought to decide values, even in agriculture, I believe. And that's the most extreme. You know, we're subsidizing things that are just unbelievable to think about. The wind subsidies that we've given. You know, it's just criminal. And people benefit from that. I get it. You know, people get royalties off the wind. I get why it's hard to undo it. But they don't pay any kind of gross production tax on the wind energy. And they did repeal their credits, their tax credits that they were getting that were obscene. But we need to have a government that works on both sides of the equation. Just go up to 30,000 feet and look down on the whole thing, which is what I try to do. We need to repeal on both sides of the equation. We need to repeal on funding, and we need to repeal on taxing. We need to reform government and prevent waste. Why do we do these across-the-board cuts? You know, everything's not created equal. All public agencies and public programs are not created equal. Take the important ones and fund those and cut the rest. And regardless of the weeping and gnashing of teeth it causes, it's the right thing to do. And in the long run, we'll prosper by doing that, by using our resources more efficiently. And we need to fund government. And guess what? If you did that, if you cut all the rest, and you cut the credits, and you cut the waste in government, you'd have enough money to fund the core services of government. Now, everybody's got a different idea of what that is. My idea is probably a lot less than most. But we could pay our teachers. And so when we did the 7%, we were very specific, pay our teachers. Because I think that's one thing that most of us can agree on. That we need people that are competent, compensated professionals teaching our children. So that's why we did that. And I just wanted to come to this group, and you guys are kind of my conscience. You know, really, I'm serious. I always think about what would Charlie say. I always do. And I've violated that Charlie says a lot of times in my life. I've been a pragmatist my entire life, I'll tell you. But it's time to be principled. Our state is in a desperate, bankrupt situation. $800 million in the hole. And the little gross production tax they did, it was nothing. It's a sham. It's a fraud. And I try to explain it, but I probably don't have time. But how much time do I have, John?
You got a couple of minutes left, but
okay.
If you want to go to questions now, we can.
Yeah, let's go to questions. I'll just tell you it's a fraud what they did. It doesn't raise the money they say it's going to raise. It acts like there is something worse than doing nothing. And that's doing something that you think is something that's actually nothing. They get to claim credit for something, but it's nothing. That's terrible. That's abhorrent. Okay.
Let me just start out by clarifying several things, because for some of what you're saying, it's like hearing another language to the common man. So allow me to take a few minutes to sort of repeat back some of what you said and make sure I'm understanding it, and then maybe they can ask educated questions. First thing I want to do is just clarify that we are not in a hole. There is no deficit. These millions of dollars that they say we don't have aren't owed to anybody. What we're short of is what they'd like to spend. So the answer is just don't spend it. It's not a problem we need to stress out about. Just cut government and the problem is solved. But let me go to some of the things you specifically said. First of all, you were saying that you used to be involved with the OIPA and that you left that association. You started a new association with 15 of your compadres representing 3,000 or so wells. What was the name of that organization, and how do we find it? What's the website? How do we follow you?
The website, it's the Oklahoma Energy Producers Alliance, and the website is okenergyproducers.org. okenergyproducers.org. And we have a Facebook page that is going crazy. You know, I've learned about the importance of social media, and I bet you guys have too, because you're electing more and more like-minded people to office. And social media is not the future, it's the now. If you're not up on it now, you're losing.
That's right. Nobody's paying attention anymore to 4, 5, 9, and 25.
That's right.
They go straight to Facebook. They go straight to the web to get data and verify it and make decisions based on that. So that actually gives us some hope here that we might be able to get the word out to the 3% to vote the right way on some things. Let me understand the gross production tax, the whole idea of taxing oil. I want to make sure I understand that. So you've got a well, let's say it's 20 years old, and you're pumping up 2 barrels every day. You sell that barrel of oil on the market, say for $50, and you're saying that 7% of that goes to the state of Oklahoma to the General Revenue Fund. Am I following that correctly?
Well, yes, but a little more detail. 2% of that, basically, 1% stays for county roads and 1% stays for education schools in the counties where it's produced. So, but 7% of the gross goes to
the
government.
State and goes to government.
That's correct.
And now, if it's a brand new well of any type, right now they are only having to pay 2% on each barrel of oil.
That's correct.
So some new guys come in with millions of dollars, put in a bunch of new wells, sometimes drilling sideways and taking your oil, and they're only having to pay 2% on what they produce, and you're having to pay 7% on what you produce.
That's the fact.
Okay, so I understand that now. That's super helpful. Now, the other thing you said a number of times is you mentioned the word equity, and you say that in Oklahoma, it's the state, that is the Corporation Commission, that sets equities. I don't know what that means. Help me understand what that means, because you talked about how royalties are always a quarter of ownership. In Texas,
that's
for example.
in Texas.
So what does it mean if the state sets equity?
What it means, if I want to lease your minerals, and I offer you $50 an acre and a 1/8 royalty, okay? And you say, I don't want that. I want a quarter royalty and $100 an acre. I say, well, I don't have to work with you. No problem. I'll go to the Corporation Commission and pool you, and then I'll put on testimony. You'll end up getting an 1/8 and $50 an acre, or you might get a 3/16 and $50 an acre. You won't get the highest and best that's paid in the area. Yeah. And when we trade among ourselves, for instance, I mean, when we've got leasehold, this is complicated, but when we got leasehold out there and they want to drill a horizontal well through it, we can't keep them from doing it. We've got a contract with the mineral owners to develop a certain amount of acreage, but the Corporation Commission, they set the rules. This isn't statute. They could undo it. They set the rules that they'll let a horizontal well come through your property as long as they stay 600 feet from your well. Well, they're fracking into wells 2 and 3 miles away in the stack play out in northwestern Oklahoma. And so it's destroying mineral owners' property all around those horizontal units. And the producers are just going to go out of business because they're losing everything. And I get emotional about that. I hate that. You did bring up an interesting point I need to expand on. That 2% rate is for the first 3 years. And what you need to know about that is they get 65 to 80% of all the oil that they're going to ever get in the first 3 years. So 65 to 80% of all the oil and gas they're ever going to produce is going to be produced at a 2% tax rate, while the rest of us pay 7%.
Real quick, help me understand the royalty ownership. Let's say I have a 25%, 25% ownership in the well. So when you sell that barrel for $50, and then for the first 3 years, 2% goes to the state, then it goes up to 7%. Out of that $50, do I get a quarter of that?
You get your share of it as a mineral owner. You do.
Based on whatever my equity share is per the contract.
Whatever your interest is. What I'm telling you is your interest is less because we have the marketplace not deciding equities.
Yeah, you're saying in Oklahoma the Corporation Commission is basically going to ensure that the developer gets what he wants in the contract.
Yes.
And it could be a very small percentage compared to what it would be in other states.
Yes. And for instance, I was going to say in the stack play, for instance, up in Garfield, Blaine, Logan, those counties, Kingfisher, in that play, you're getting maybe at the very most $2,000 an acre in the second hottest play in America. Okay. In Texas, between the two plays in the Permian, not even in the play, you're getting $30,000. So we're getting, and you know why that is? Because they don't have to pay more than that here, because they can take you to the Corporation Commission and get it for $1,500. Yeah, it's unbelievable. Yeah, it sounds like that system of forced pooling sounds like a Franklin Roosevelt program, not a Red Oklahoma program. I mean, we're going to try to end it. And I'm telling you, you think the corporate jets flew in from Houston with $5,000 Armani suits on this deal? There won't be enough tarmac in Oklahoma City to hold them because they got the advantage. They have nowhere else where they can just take it for what they want to pay. It's just incredible, and we're gonna face it head on, even though it's the impossible. It reminds me of the saying that that I heard, and of course the Israelis take credit for it. It was on a building in Israel when I was there, and I loved it. But it really came from the U.S. Naval Headquarters in D.C. had this saying on the as the top of the wall as you walked in. It said, "The difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little bit longer." And that's our attitude. This may take us the rest of my life to get it done, but we're going to do it. We're going to change that because it's not right, and it's not who we are as Oklahomans. And our elected officials, the only way we can offset the money is through constituent action. And I've spoken to groups about political action, and I've always said the same thing to every one of them. It's unfortunate, but in politics, money most always trumps merit. But constituency trumps everything. And so that's what we're doing. We're grassroots. We're getting people calling their senators and their reps. And they haven't voted on it yet. And the reason they haven't voted on it yet is because they don't have the votes yet. They're going to include revenue in it, and that's going to make it harder for some of our rhinos to not charge ahead with when they add revenue. But for principle, if they were principled, they wouldn't vote for it.
Are you saying that the legislature can override the rules that the Corporation Commission has already produced?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The Oil and Gas Division of the Corporation Commission is the only division that was created by statute. The rest of it's constitutionally created. But the Oil and Gas Division was done by statute. So everything they do is an interpretation of statute. And when the statute says nothing, they just make up their own rules.
That's a great question, because that was the next thing I wanted to clarify. We're stuck with the Corporation Commission pending the people of Oklahoma wanting to do away with it. So theoretically, philosophically speaking, we already have our own sort of environmental agency that can protect the environment. We already have courts that can protect rights. We could do away with the Corporation Commission, except that it's just not practically likely to happen. So you're saying we need the legislature to step in and write statutes to protect rights.
Well, there does need to be an arbitrator of rights when you have
disagreements. It isn't the Corporation Commission.
Well, it should be. That's a very good question, John, and I'm going to have to think that through more. Would we be better off if we handled our disputes in district court? Maybe.
It seems like there should be a jury involved somewhere along the line, and
or
not
the
some panel of government employees
that are elected with campaign contributions. Right. I'm going to have to think about that a while.
Okay, let's get another question.
Hi, my name is Tanya.
Hi, Tanya.
I want to just ask you, you're talking about legislation. Are you actively pursuing writing legislation to overcome the things that you've described to us today? Are you like multiple? It sounds like there's room for multiple pieces of legislation, not like one big thing, but little, chip away type bills. Because I guess my question is, how is it that you're planning on overcoming the corruption that's when you submit if the answer is yes to the legislation that you're writing? How are you going to overcome the lobbying, the barbecues held at the state capitol, and the campaign contributions? How are you going to overcome all of that in order to see your legislation through?
Well, that's a tall order. And like I say, the only way to overcome it is with the people. It has to be a grassroots movement of people that saying enough's enough. And we're almost to the point where there is no confidence in state government. And anybody that has confidence in state government needs to go out there and sit for a day. And you'll change your mind about anybody being competent that's there. And I've got friends there but they all get caught up. For instance, the Senate Energy Chairman is a good friend of mine. And he works for an oil company, drilling company. Well, guess who they drill for? They drill for the horizontal companies. Right. So you think, is there any surprise that he's the author of their bill? I mean, the other thing I think we should do is we should move toward more of a citizen legislature. I spent time in North Dakota working up there in government affairs. And in North Dakota, they don't pay them anything. They go to the legislature to do a service to their state when they're basically have already done well enough in their businesses or in their lives or in their careers to be able to do that. And they pay them a per diem maybe or something like that, but it's nothing really. You couldn't live on it. Here, we've created a system where people depend on that job so much that it influences their votes.
Pay for play.
Pay for play. They want to stay. Give you a good example.
Yeah.
And I don't mind telling this group. Young Marcus McIntyre, Duncan, Oklahoma. Fine young man. Went to seminary, matter of fact. I found out, getting to know him a little better. Fine young man, just got elected, newly elected. He writes this beautiful piece on don't be bullied by big oil. And it's beautiful. I mean, it says everything we would want to say if we were saying it ourselves. So I go up to him 2 days ago on the floor, get him out of the house just to talk to him. Really what I was doing was congratulating him on having the courage and the integrity to write that. And you know what he did? He started shaking. And he said, well, I may not be able to stay with you. Halliburton is my biggest employer, and they've got Halliburton threatening to beat me next time. I just wanted to take him and shake him and said, do you believe what you said? Are you so in need of a job that you're going to sacrifice your obviously strong principles for an election? But I didn't do that. I said, Marcus, that becomes the issue. Shine a light on the fact that they're using those tactics in your race. Because rural folks, I don't care if they're the biggest employer in Duncan, Oklahoma, their employees will not like a big company like that telling them how to vote. It'll work in your interest. Zach Taylor in Seminole County just got elected in a special election. Fine young man. And he's one of us. He's on our board. Big Oil spent probably probably 50, 60,000 to defeat him in the primary. 5-person Republican primary. The state chamber spends 20,000 on independent expenditure, and you know where that money came from. That didn't come from the chamber members. It came from Big Oil. They funnel it through the chamber on an independent commercial against Zach. Zach wins in a 5-person race without a runoff. And I gave him the same advice. Zach, fear will destroy you. Quit you like men. Be strong. You know, that's the scripture. And that's great advice. Quit you like men. Be strong. And have faith. And follow what you think is the will of God. And you'll be fine. Shine a light on the fact that the big city organizations are trying to beat you in your own home county. Are we going to let Big Oil elect our guys in Seminole County or Pontotoc County or Sequoia County or anywhere else? No. They will only do it if the people running for office need that job so bad that they're afraid. They let fear take over instead of reason and principle. You know, there's a difference. And I love what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, in matters of principle, I will stand firm like a rock. In matters of opinion, I will flow like a river. And that's the demeanor that we ought to have. We ought to know what our principles are and stand on those. And when we don't know, then we ought to flow till we get a principle on that matter. Okay.
Are you sure you're not a Baptist preacher? All right. We got a couple of minutes left.
Anybody want to pass the plate? Oil prices are pretty bad.
Just a quick question. What happens to the royalty owners when the production drops 70% and they only receive 30% of their portion of that well?
Well, you just said what happens to it. That's what happens. And in all honesty, if you're a royalty owner in a horizontal drilling unit, man, that's a great deal. Because you don't have to worry about payback. You're part of that big well, which is a great deal for 2 or 3 years. The vertical wells that are destroyed in that process will make the same oil over 30, 40 years, and they will enjoy higher prices than this. We're at a low price environment. Why are we subsidizing these guys to take our resources out at $45 a barrel? It makes no sense. Even if you're a Democrat, it makes no sense to do that. So does that answer your question? If you're a royalty owner in one of the vertical wells that gets destroyed, you go from whatever you're getting to nothing. If you're a royalty owner in the horizontal well, you're going to get paid really well for 3 years. But your kids and grandkids aren't going to have anything, basically. So, it's your choice. I'm a royalty owner, and I make that decision all the time, whether I want to let them, protest a horizontal drilling unit and just keep the vertical wells going, or whether I think it's worth doing the horizontal. So I usually have so little royalty interest, it's not worth doing. Anything else?
Let's call it. It's 1 o'clock. We'll gang up on you afterwards and
All
ask
right.
more questions. This has been super informative. Mike, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, guys. My favorite group in Oklahoma.